Mayor, Council. I think, as the City Attorney says, we have to do our due diligence on this. We can come back to the Council to reaffirm that, or if the Council is comfortable enough with just the premise of basically the city's dollar is not at risk per se, and allow the Mayor and myself to move this contract along. The trouble is that I believe Michael will say that there is some competition for this money, and so the state grant money, and so that we have to be timely as we move forward on this in order to get in line. And so in an earlier communication, I authorized the city non-bindingly to get in line, so to speak, so that we can receive this grant money. No other city I'm aware of has done anything like this. This is a new program. It was just put together this fall here, and one, I think I'm very enthusiastic about it because, one, the company that makes this 10K Solar is a Minnesota company. They're located in Bloomington. It's a new technology. It's utilizing reflective material from 3M, and so it's basically something that nobody has seen before. Now, that being said, there is a risk of always of being in the forefront of these things. It's safer to wait and to have somebody else be at the forefront on the cutting edge and taking the risks. But in this regard, with the state grant, the Xcel Energy rebates, and this federal income investment tax credit that goes through the leasee, the city is basically, our dollars are not at risk. So I think in this case, it probably bears worthwhile for us to be on the cutting edge of this technology, and I think it's kind of be on a wing and a prayer, but sometimes that's how things have to operate.
Follow up,
please.
Well, that's where I start to get a little nervous. I know we have to be out front to apply for the energy grant, but as we found out in the last couple of weeks, sometimes grants don't pan out. And then there's the Xcel Energy rebate thing, which says it can be applied for, but is not secured. Approval from the council to apply for the rebate is required, blah, blah, blah. The funds are available from Xcel in a set amount each year, and qualifying is necessary. So that paragraph kind of says to me there are little, if not pitfalls, there are at least potholes that your ankle could fall into. If any of those didn't happen, then what's our financial risk?
Okay. I think maybe Michael can elaborate a little bit further on this.
I'm hoping so. Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members, my name is Michael Kraus, and from Candy, Ohio. We're a small consulting firm based in Minneapolis, and I was merely the grant writer, but I have worked on a number of these projects for other cities, and so I am familiar with both the financial structure and some of the legal issues on how they can come together, and I think your city manager has stated it pretty clearly. Let me just kind of review just a little bit about how these projects are happening today, because there are a couple of new initiatives that are making them possible. One is that the 2010 legislature approved a new rebate program. It's Xcel Energy's money, but it's money that they're required to contribute into a fund that basically is tied to their nuclear waste storage at Prairie Island. It's called the Renewable Development Fund, and the legislature carved out a piece of that and set it aside and said there will be rebates for solar as long as the components that go into those solar electrical systems are made in Minnesota. The legislature was trying to stimulate an emerging renewable energy business in Minnesota. That was their public policy interest in doing this, and this is one way to do it. And in fact, it's working. It has attracted at least one new company now, and there will probably be others who are actually going to move manufacturing facilities here. So we're not only getting the benefit of renewable energy, but we're actually getting the benefit of good paying manufacturing jobs that go into the manufacturing of those components. So from that standpoint, it is working. The rebate itself is equal to $5 a watt or up to 60% of project cost. So it's a very, very substantial rebate. It is actually it's the most lucrative rebate, I believe, in all of North America. So that is one thing that we're taking advantage of. In most cases, then, we take that Excel rebate and we combine it together with a federal investment tax credit for renewable energy, which has been around now for some time. It's been used to do wind projects in greater Minnesota. It's been used to do other kinds of renewable energy projects all around the country. And what we've done is we've created a structure where the city, which is not a tax-paying entity itself, is still able to get the value of that tax credit by partnering with someone who has a tax liability and basically owns the system for that initial period of time, takes advantage of the tax credit, and at the end of that period sells you back the system for $1 and you own it. So we've created a structure where the partnership between a city and a tax-paying entity allows you to get the benefit of a tax credit that you would otherwise not be able to get because you aren't a tax-paying entity as a municipal agency. In most cases, that would get you about 90% of the way there. And so there's about 10% of the cost of installation that's remaining, and then generally that's paid for by the value of that energy that those solar panels produce each year. So on a system like this, which is going to cost about $320,000, the combination of the Excel rebate and the federal investment tax credit is going to pay for about 90% of that cost. So there's 10% remaining, about $32,000. Your system is going to produce $5,000 or $6,000 of electrical power each year. So at some point between that 5 or 6 or 7 year period, it's generated enough energy to pay for that last increment. In your case, we actually have something of an embarrassment of riches because we were successful in getting the grant. So in addition to the Excel rebate program and the federal investment tax credit, we are able to apply the $100,000 grant from the state of Minnesota. So the city's financial risk is even further minimized under this structure. Now, there are a couple little wrinkles, and I'll try not to make it too complicated because it can get, to me, I do this so much every day that it seems simple, but I know it can be complicated sometimes in explanation. The rebates from Xcel Energy don't come in one lump sum up front. They have decided to pay them out over 5 years. So they will contract and they will say to you, we guarantee you these rebates, and they will sign that agreement, and it's backed up by the balance sheet and the full faith and credit of Xcel Energy. However, they're going to pay it out to you in 5 annual installments. So what that means is that you almost of necessity have to create at least a 5-year financing structure so you can take advantage of that. So you're going to have to pay for the system up front, but then you're going to have a structure then that can accept those rebates over that following 5 years. It just so happens, and I found out since this was done on purpose and very, very much by design, that in order to access that federal tax credit, the person who is the owner of that system, in order to take that tax credit, has to hold it under IRS rules for a minimum of 5 years. So it just so happens that the ownership requirement under the IRS rules to take the federal tax credit and the way the rebate is paid out by Xcel Energy both happen to fall within those 5-year windows. So it really creates a very, very perfect structure for us to take a system and finance it over that period. So, yes, Mr. Mayor.
I was thinking you might be taking a breath. Mr. Nephew has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in order to take the tax benefit, you have to have a taxable entity that has a tax liability to be offset with the credits. And so that has to be created with an ownership interest. So in effect, the space is being leased from the city, or
yes,
that's how it's working out? Okay. Then my question relates is with any of the other funding sources, do any of them have limitations such that they have to go to like a municipal corporation or a non-taxable thing? Is there any risk there of incompatible funding sources, if that makes sense?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Nephew, it's my understanding that the grant will come directly to the city. The city is the applicant for the state grant. The grant for $100,000 will come to the city. The city will in turn use that to buy down the cost of the system. So that's a very clean, direct approach to that use of that funding. In the case of the XL rebates, as long as the city is taking agrees to take 100% of the power that's being produced by these solar panels and has entered into essentially a lease purchase agreement where you're leasing it for that 5-year period of time and then you're agreeing to buy it after the lease purchase is over, then you are essentially a sufficient owner to accept the rebates.
Okay, all right. So the structure is that we are renting it for 5 years and then we will own it.
Yes.
And so, okay.
But during that period, the revenue that's being generated is still benefiting you.
Sure.
In a sister city where we are doing a very similar arrangement, which does not have the grant, the financial value of the power that's being produced, that $5,000 or $6,000 a year, is being used to pay for that remaining little increment of cost left over after the rebates and the federal tax credit. In your case, that's not necessary because the grant is paying for that. So in your case, from day one, the power being produced there will benefit you because you've already essentially paid for that
will
last.
simply reduce our electric costs to the
Yes.
tune of $5,000 or $6,000 a month.
And
Or
then
a year,
there's limitations on the size of the system. There's limitations with the rebates from Excel. You can't be more than 40 kilowatts. You must be grid connected. There are limitations on the state grant because these are federal dollars. They're federal dollars being passed through to the state. So we're required to meet all the Buy American provisions. We're actually doing a little better. We're buying Minnesota provisions. And there are Davis-Bacon labor rules that apply. So there is a little bit of red tape. Setting up the structure where we essentially create an ownership structure to take advantage of the tax credit for 5 years during that first 5 years of operation before you then buy it and own the system. There's some legal cost involved in doing that. So we've tried to create essentially by forming a team with myself as the mere grant writer in the mix, Bob Long, who's done a lot of the legal work, Parsons Electric, who is the installer, 10K Solar, which is the Made in Minnesota component, try to put together a package here that's essentially a turnkey for cities. So you have virtually no financial risk, very little financial risk, and you can still be a leader and do a demonstration, a significant demonstration of solar energy in your community.
Mr. Chairman?
I had a follow-up question before. It says the grant has been offered to the city, and we can get in line for funds as they become available, and then you kind of answered part of my question by saying this is actual federal money that the state is doling out, yes?
Yes.
So we aren't dependent on the state having decided to give this money and not having it?
No, the federal money was appropriated under a previous budget, previous Congress. The money was then put into legislation, carved up into a number of different programs, and then appropriated by the legislature. I believe there should be a draft contract for the grant funds available to the city now. There's a few blanks to fill in on who the key contact person is, but there is a contract prepared and ready to go that would guarantee your access to that state grant.
Okay. Thank you.
In terms of the rebates, and Mr. Antonin alluded to this, there is some competition for the funds. There was fairly intense competition for the grant funds. But in terms of the rebate funds, this is a very popular program. There are a number of cities that are, and school districts and private businesses that are catching on to just how advantageous this is. And so they are getting in line quickly to take advantage of the rebates